Good morning. Good morning. That was fantastic. Somewhere, Sarah dropped off a little picture, but it coming from down that way. Okay, we'll get to that in a minute. The other day I was in Kroger's doing some shopping. I was on my way back to the fruits and vegetables. A lemon cake caught my eye. I know, imagine that. A lemon cake caught my eye. I picked one up and I looked at it. With lack of a better term, this little old lady from Pasadena looked at me and said, "It'll make you fat." I could tell the young lady that was with her was pretty much embarrassed. She was trying to hide behind all the cakes there. She was just, beside herself, because I'm sure this lady has said many things like this in the past. And I put my arm around the little lady and I said, "Oh, honey, we're way past that point." So much for the obvious. And I chuckled and I'm on my way. Well, sometimes the obvious isn't always there. I've always had a love for history, and not just the obvious history that we're taught in school. We're talking, we all know about George Washington and Ben Franklin and Abraham Lincoln. But I remember my granddad Miser sitting in his chair. In fact, my mother, who now owns the house, has a chair in that exact same place, very similar chair. So every time I go up to visit, I can just picture my grandpa right there. But I always remember him sitting there reading his Smithsonian history magazine. And he would tell me about all these stories behind the stories. And I think that's why I really enjoy history as much as I do. In fact, I consider him my original history channel. Now, along with history, I'm a big fan of spy movies. My wife cringes every single time an old James Bond movie comes on, because of course I'm sitting there watching it like it was the brand new one, and I've only seen it maybe 100 times. But that doesn't stop me from really enjoying a good thriller. I couldn't get enough of 24, and I can't get enough of Burn Notice that's on today. When I originally started to do this, I was going to talk about 3 different patriots from the American Revolution, but one really stood out to me. What if I told you this man was a spy? Not only a spy, but he was able to walk around in public, not a care of being caught. He almost touched every main character that we've been taught since grade school in the American Revolution. So this guy got around quite a bit. He served under the French Allied forces and eventually under some guy by the name of, Washington. He also found out about another guy named Benedict Arnold, and we'll get into that here in a second. And he was able to stop 10,000 British reinforcements from reaching Yorktown. Yeah, that Yorktown. Who would you think I'd be talking about? Maybe Franklin, or Hancock, or maybe Paul Revere? But we're not even close. I'm speaking of, and I will use his original name, James Aristead. Any of you ever heard of James Aristead? Okay. Well, James Aristead was born into slavery around 1748 in New Kent, Virginia. Jump ahead to 1781. His master, William Aristead, with whom he had a very good relationship, granted James permission to join the revolutionary cause. Now, in that picture you see coming around there, that would be a portrait by John Baptiste Péan of the Marquis de Lafayette, the commander of the forces, French Allied forces. And there, standing beside him, is James Aristead. Okay. We never hear about the other guy in these photos, do we? Never ever. But after joining the American Continental Congress, he was stationed to serve under Lafayette. Lafayette saw his value right away. He was employed as a spy with the hopes of gathering intelligence in regards to the enemy movements. And this is where it really gets good. Posing as a runaway slave, he was able to move across enemy lines. In fact, while working under Lafayette, he successfully infiltrated the British General Charles Cornwallis headquarters, posing as that slave, and then was hired by the British to be a spy against the Americans. So, and while pretending to be a British spy, Aristead gained the confidence of General Benedict Arnold and General Cornwallis. Okay. They thought they could get a lot of great information about the American forces through this guy, and they didn't know they were being played from the beginning. Arnold was so convinced of Aristead's pose as a runaway slave that he used him to guide British troops through local roads. Aristead often traveled between camps, spying on British officers who spoke openly around him. Aristead documented the information of these reports and delivered them to other American spies, and then returned back to the British camp again. Now, he actually at one time traveled from the British camps back to West Point with Benedict Arnold. Can you imagine knowing what he knew and the type of patriot that he was? How he was just trying to, I could just imagine what he went through, not wanting to take out Arnold when he had the chance. You know, that was always very interesting to me. But what Aristead was able to tell the Continental Army was that 10,000 troops were coming. Pardon me. And this information that he held was given to the French Allied forces just off the coast. They were able to block off the British reinforcements from coming in and getting to Yorktown. Okay. So, in a lot of ways, we could have ended up on the wrong side of history without James Aristead. He was definitely connected to everybody. And a truer American hero, there was not. And of course, we all know that in October of 1781, the British surrendered at Yorktown. Now this part will make you think that the government has not changed in over 235 years. When the war was over, despite his true patriotism, despite all of his heroic acts, and despite putting his life on the line for 3+ years, he was returned to his master, William Aristead. This new government said James was not eligible for emancipation under the Act of 1783 for slave soldiers because he was considered a slave spy. Don't you love this paperwork and all the red tape of government? Like I said, it hasn't changed in 235 years, it seems like. Because he was considered a slave spy, he had to petition the Virginia legislature for his emancipation. Word of this miscarriage of justice made it to the Marquis de Lafayette. He helped James by writing a recommendation letter for his freedom. And finally, in 1787, he was granted his freedom. James was so grateful to General Lafayette that he took his surname. Now James Lafayette moved out on his own, moving 9 miles south of where he was born in New Kent, where he bought 40 acres of land. He was going to be a farmer. He later married. He raised a large family. He was granted a $40 annual pension by the Virginia legislature. Yeah, I'm sure it went far to that. For all of his services during the American Revolution. And so, 81 years after being born into slavery, James Lafayette died August 9th, 1830. He was truly an American patriot, and safe to say that, once again, we would be on the wrong side of history if it weren't for James Lafayette. And by the way, that's him holding the horse with Lafayette, posing as the slave to the very end, not knowing that he changed the course of history. Thank you.